Good evening.
Good evening.
Please tell us how it is that in our spiritual ongoing there are times when we want to say to others, please do not touch me. That is my personality, for I have not yet ascended. Indeed, that is an actual experience that does happen and happens frequently. We exist actually as states of consciousness. Last night we spoke of that state of consciousness which we are as human beings. A state of consciousness made up both of good and evil. We do good and we do evil. We think good and we think evil. We think hope and we think discouragement. We think courage and we think fear. We think love and we think hate. We're just a composite of good and evil. And if we have any thought of God at all, it is more or less in the sense of entertaining a concept of God, usually an erroneous one, given to us either in childhood or picked up in some other way. Then, after we, for any reason at all, start on a metaphysical or spiritual path in life, we come to another state of consciousness in which, first of all, we learn that there is a presence within us. We learn that the kingdom of God is within us. We learn that there is a He within us that is greater than he that is in the world. He performeth that which is given me to do. He is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. In other words, we now begin to learn about a presence, a power. Usually it is referred to as He, and we think of God as He. You can hardly imagine how many people, especially church people, were shocked when the Infinite Way first referred to God as It. And it took quite a bit of awakening to realize that God really wasn't a male. God wasn't a he. But then neither was God a she. There's no reason to think of God as a female any more than as a male. And then we got down to the fact that God is referred to as soul or spirit or substance or law, and now, of course, it is more or less accepted that you may say God is It without offending anyone. But in the first state of consciousness, we are still thinking of God as He, and we have a personalized sense of God. When we get to where we can accept God as It, we are still in another state of consciousness. We are now in a state of consciousness where we are beginning to perceive why you cannot pray to God, "Oh God, take care of my rent Saturday." Because by now you're beginning to see that God isn't a person. God isn't a treasurer holding big bags of money just waiting for you to pray for it. By now you're beginning to perceive that your original concept of God was an erroneous one. And bit by bit, you come into the awareness that God is spirit, or God is life, or God is law. And a change comes up here in your consciousness. You begin to withdraw that mental effort to get something from God. You realize the hopelessness of it. You begin to understand why it is so foolish to believe that we have an influence with God because we're a Christian Science Journal practitioner, or we're an Infinite Way practitioner, or a Unity practitioner, and all these dear ministers and rabbis and priests that have really given their whole lives to God don't have a bit of influence in getting healings from. It's kind of shocking at first, and then you realize, why, that's not the process at all. You know, I can still remember my very earliest days on this path when I went into buildings where there were Christian Science practitioners and thought what holy buildings they must be, that these people had such influence with God. You could go to them and they closed their eyes and God immediately gave you healings. Well, it's all right. I was in the kindergarten stage of religion. But now just think of what a different state of consciousness you are in once you realize there is no such God. There is no giving God. There's no God that is going ever to give you anything, because there isn't any God withholding anything. Oh, well, now, wait a minute. That opens a whole new line. How about all my sins? Isn't he withholding my good because of my sins? I don't know. Can you picture God sitting around somewhere holding back your supply? Or no, you see, that image of God has to disappear. And all of a sudden you realize, why, of course, the sun shines in my garden whether I'm a saint or a sinner. Laws of arithmetic operate for me whether I'm a saint or a sinner. Laws of nature operate. Saint or sinner. God is no respecter of persons. Now you're in a still different consciousness. Well, all of a sudden, this that we call practicing the presence of God, our second stage of unfoldment, all of a sudden we are aware now that there is a something very holy, something very sacred. We are aware now that there is a presence that goes before us, that our work is becoming easier because it is not taking our own mental strife or physical strife, but for some reason we are spiritually endowed and all things go more smoothly. Now we are in still a different consciousness. And by this time, we are drawing away a little bit from our more gross brothers and sisters. As a matter of fact, by this time, we don't like to hear swear words. We can't quite take obscene stories or pictures. We even if we could at one time, we can't now. The nature has begun to change, and we automatically edge away from people who swear. We edge away from people who are continuously telling off-color stories. We even begin to withdraw from atmospheres that are full of drink or smoke. Now, it's not that we're any holier than thou. It's only that now we're in a different consciousness, in a different world. And our own nature is more refined, and we can't quite take that grossness of the human mind. And we find ourselves pulling away. Well, now, this is all gradual unfoldment, and it takes a long while to make this transition, but ultimately and you have to take step by step, and you come to a place where a spiritual impartation is given you within. A spiritual experience takes place. You may or may not be able to describe it afterward, but you do recognize it. And if anyone is around you, when it takes place or soon after, the automatic reaction is to get away from them. Be all by yourself, not close to anyone human. And because our friends or relatives naturally do not know what's happening inside of us, they'll come to us and talk to us in the ordinary tone of voice or about the ordinary subjects. And that is the most natural and instinctive reaction. Don't touch me. Don't say anything right now. I look at you. It's all right. I'm only half here. And the truth of the matter is that you are at that time only half here, and probably not even half, because your physical body is still here, but the greater part of you is away in this experience, and it doesn't want any part of the earth. It is for this reason that as individuals go higher in spiritual attainment, there are some who reach the height of conscious union with God. And at that stage, they have a choice. They can lay down their lives, the human sense of life, and walk out of it and live their life in the higher plane, the incorporeal and spiritual plane. Or they can let themselves come back to earth, never fully being here anymore, except physically, and continue to perform some spiritual service or function on earth. There are very few who have chosen to leave this world at that time, because at that point it is usual for some spiritual activity to be revealed to them that they can perform. Some spiritual mission may be given them, and they choose to remain for a while to perform that function. And these people very often are in that state, that because you see their physical body there, you think they're right here where you are, and they're not. They're off, and your very talking to them is pulling them back, whereas by choice they would remain where they are until they come back naturally. Now, all of this has to do with the fact that we are states and stages of consciousness, and that we evolve from one state to another. And as a matter of fact, that is why we are on the spiritual path. We were at one time the man of earth, the human being made up of good and evil, with only some vague concept of God, some humanly taught concept of God. Then we became a state of consciousness that began to realize there is a He. There is a presence within me. I live, yet not I alone. There is something within me. There is another presence. Or I can do all things through this presence within me. At this stage, you might refer to this as the metaphysical stage of your life. In this metaphysical stage, you have learned a great secret, that there is a power of truth over error, or there is the power of the immortal over the mortal, or there is the power of good over evil. By now, you've lost a great deal of fear of the negative conditions of the world, of the evils of the world, because you have come into a state of consciousness where you perceive that this power or presence that you've discovered is greater than the evils of the world. And as a matter of fact, by thinking upon this presence and power, by dwelling in it, you find that the evils are overcome in your life. Sicknesses disappear, sins, false appetites disappear, and as far as you can see, you have discovered a power that now dispels the negative influences or evils of this world. And this, I believe, could safely be called the metaphysical stage of our experience. We are sure now that we have a truth. We can even protect ourselves with truth from the evils of the world. Or we think of truth as a power that can be used. Now this is a far different state of consciousness than that first human one. But it is only a transitional state of consciousness because you have not yet entered truth. There is no truth to the belief that truth is greater than error. There is no truth really to the belief that good is greater than evil, or that the immortal is greater than the mortal. This is not true at all. This is a relative truth on the way up to truth. You have another stage to go in consciousness. And this comes when you begin to realize, finally, that truth didn't do anything to evil, that evil wasn't a power. Light didn't do anything to darkness. There wasn't any entity called darkness. It didn't go anywhere. It wasn't removed. Gradually, you begin to see, and this becomes a new principle with you, that God is the only power. God is the only presence, and evil isn't a power, and evil isn't a presence at all. And now you come to a state of consciousness where you no longer use truth. Why would you use truth? There isn't any error to use it on. Truth is infinite. Truth is omnipresence. If truth is omnipresence, there isn't any evil. So you don't have to use truth when there isn't anything but truth. Now you're coming into a whole new consciousness described by the Master, resist not evil. If you watch him about his healing work, the cripple, what did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk. No using the power of God or truth over evil, but the acknowledgement that the evil wasn't a power. What did hinder you? If God is here, omnipotence, omnipresence, then there's no power to stop you from walking or talking or seeing. Open your eyes. No appeal to God, no using truth, just the realization that if truth is all, what is to hinder you opening your eyes? You are now rising into a high spiritual consciousness in which you are perceiving the unreal nature of appearances. This is a mistake that some young metaphysicians often make, and they'll make it in the presence of doctors or lawyers and so forth. Oh, evil isn't real, you know. I don't really believe in evil. That must sound very sensible to a doctor who has spent his whole life discovering the nature of evil and what to do about it. He must think he's an awful fool wasting his time and money that way. And of course, the statement is nonsensical, because in that human state in which you are a composition of good and evil, not only there is evil, and not only it is power, but as you so well know, it's a lot more power than good. There are a lot more sick people than well ones. So, if you really come into your change of consciousness gradually, you won't make any statements to your friends or relatives, oh, evil isn't real, oh, I don't believe in disease. You'll keep your fingers on your lips, and you'll thank God that you are beginning to perceive that since God is spirit, this is a spiritual universe. And nothing can enter this universe that defileth or maketh a lie. This is a spiritual universe, and it's governed by spiritual law. There are not two powers here. There's only one. There are not two presences here. There is only one, omnipresence. One power, omnipotence. And so, gradually, your whole consciousness changes, and you settle down into a state of peace, because you now have nothing to war against. You don't even need God. You don't need truth. You don't need anything, because I and the Father are one, and truth is all there is. Now, you have no more battles with error. You don't have to overcome the evil in somebody else's mind or your own. Stand ye still, see the salvation of the Lord. Put up thy sword. You need not fight. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Not in mental gyrations, not in battles with the devil, not in mental arguments, not in using truth over error. Just be still. Be still and know that I, in the midst of thee, am God. Oh, now you are entering a state of consciousness that is sublime, because there is no more warfare. You do not have to go out and save the world. Very soon you'll discover you can't save the world. You're going to have to be very dedicated to save those who come to you to be saved. You never will save those that you have to go out looking for, because they are not looking for the things that you are seeking or offering. Remember those who came to the Master, ye seek me for the loaves and fishes, and I haven't any to give you. I can give you the realization of the presence of God. When you have that, you'll be fed, because in the presence of God there is no lack, there's no emptiness, no empty spaces, no vacuums. I can't give you loaves and fishes. I can merely give you the realization of the presence of God. So it is. Your nature now begins to change. You are no longer demonstrating automobiles or the sale of a house. You are no longer demonstrating good business. You are no longer demonstrating good health. You've gone right out of the demonstration business. For a while, I will admit, that there is one form of demonstration that remains, and it's a very good one. It is where you realize that you must demonstrate the messenger, not the message. Supposing I prayed very seriously for a wonderful message to give you tonight, and suppose I got it. Now what am I going to do tomorrow night? But if my constant prayer is the messenger, Father, not the message, once I have the messenger, the message keeps going on and on and on forever. Supposing I did demonstrate my Cadillac tomorrow. I don't have need for one. We only have 40 miles an hour driving in the island, so don't anyone give me a Cadillac. We can't use it. But let us say that to show forth how prosperous I am, I demonstrate my Cadillac. To begin with, I have to keep it up too. And then I have to prepare when it wears out to get another one. So once I am on the round of demonstration, I'm really on the wheel of life. I've really got to keep demonstrating over and over and over again. But now, we are at the stage of advancing consciousness where we are no longer taking thought for the things of this world. We are no longer taking thought what we shall eat, what we shall drink, wherewithal we shall be clothed. Our only demonstration now is the messenger, the Christ. That I may be in God and God in me. That I may constantly and consciously realize the indwelling Christ. That I may always know and feel this divine presence within me. You see, now you have evolved probably into what might be called a third stage of spiritual unfoldment, in which you have now left the powers of this world, the good over evil and so forth. You've left the demonstrating world, and you have risen now to where there is an indwelling spirit, an indwelling Christ. And once you attain this stage of unfoldment, can you not see how far separated you are from the man in the street or the woman in the street? Can you not see now that they can't see out of your eyes and you can't see out of theirs? Do you see now why they tell us that how impractical this way of living is? Do you see why they tell us that we can't have people come to us unless we advertise for them and so forth and so on? No. No, you see, they can't see that because they are at that level of consciousness where they know the things of that level of consciousness. They have not yet perceived what we perceive, that there is an invisible, now think, follow me. The kingdom of God is within me. The presence of God is within me. Son, thou art ever with me. All that I have is thine. I can do all things through Christ, this Spirit of God that is in me. Therefore, I do not have to advertise. I do not have to publish testimonies. I do not have to send for anyone or proselyte for anyone. The infinite invisible knoweth my need. It knoweth my function in life. It has prepared me to be whatever I am, and it functions to fulfill my capacity, ability, function. I and my Father are one. The Father within me doeth the works. He knoweth my need before I do. Do you see the state of consciousness we are settling into now? No human effort. Oh yes, we go out and do our work, and we do it as well as we know how. But now we have no human effort to succeed, no human means to use to foster ourselves. Now it is a relaxing. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me. My sheep hear my voice. Not merely as a spiritual teacher, but as a music teacher or a salesman in business or an artist or an inventor or someone seeking capital. My Father knoweth my need. It is his good pleasure to fulfill me. See what a relaxing way of life this is. This is why at this stage we begin to look 5 or 10 years younger, because the lines begin to go out of our face. We are not all screwed up with anxiety and fear and hope. Now we're relaxed in awareness. I need not fight. My own shall come to me. All that the Father hath is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and, Son, all that I have is thine. It is at this stage you become a beholder. And it starts when you awaken in the morning and you just look out and realize, oh, the day is here. This must be the day the Lord hath made, because I was asleep. He did it all without me. Perhaps I can trust him for the next hour, too. Well, I'll take no thought for the next hour because I have to bathe and shave. So we let God take care of that hour until I get ready. But then I must have breakfast, so we let God take it a little longer. But you see, by now, we are a beholder. We say, why, yes, the Lord seems to be taking pretty good care of this day. I think I'll just go along for the next hour and watch what happens. And then we develop this consciousness of always wondering about the next hour, the next night, the next day. And it doesn't take long to behold what wonderful things God has wrought to those that love God, to those who are really trusting that there is a God closer than breathing. Now we are beholders. Now we really see we don't need any powers anymore. We've gotten past the need for powers. Now we just watch, behold God at work. We see the night turn to day. We see the day turn to night. We see the winter season and the fall and the spring and the summer. We witness the barren trees in winter, and we see them filled with fruit and flowers and buds and so forth in spring and summer. Now we really are entering the life of a beholder. Now we are bearing witness. We are witnessing God in action. No more power. See that? We've relaxed completely. We need no powers. We seek no God powers. We relax completely in His Spirit. We begin to understand life by grace, because now we find wonderful things taking place in our life, and we consciously had nothing to do with it. The very first healing I ever had of a metaphysical nature was when a relative of mine was healed through Christian Science And I began to read the textbook. And up to that time, I had to go to a chiropodist every 3 weeks. I had corns and calluses. And do you know that they disappeared and they've never come back in all of these years? Never a sign of anything on my feet needing any of that kind of attention. And but I did nothing. I had no treatment, and I gave myself no treatment. It was just in reading and beginning, I suppose, not consciously, of course, to know what the truth was, but enough must have seeped through so that the major discord, that was my major discord at that time, it disappeared. So it is, you see that as you come up into this third stage of our unfoldment, or fourth, you find you are no longer treating disease or treating people, nor are you trying to correct anyone or heal anyone or reform anyone or drag them into truth. You're perfectly content to leave this world alone because you know now that nothing is going to change the person out there but a change of consciousness. And so you know this about yourself. And you have to devote all of your life now to the development, the unfoldment of your own consciousness. While you're doing this, others are being helped. Not because you consciously want to help them, you're too busy with your own consciousness, but because with every grain or touch of light that enters your consciousness, those who touch you, who are receptive, benefit by it. But the more that you can relax and be a beholder, the more that you can give up the attempt to use a power or even believe you need a power, the more you come into the awareness God is. How foolish for me to believe that I can influence God to do something for somebody. That would make me almost greater than God if I had that much influence over God. How foolish for me to believe that I can influence God, that I can cause God to do something that God isn't already doing. How foolish of me to believe that I know more what my need is or your need than God. And you see how you are settling back into that? Well, yes, God is. And God is closer than breathing. And God is omnipotence. And God is omnipresence. God is. I don't have to make God anything. That's been the trouble in the past. I have created my own kind of a God and then determined what I wanted that God to do. But I've discovered now there is no such God. The only God there is the all-knowing, infinite omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. And if I wish to be God-governed, I must be still. I must be still and let God's government take over. Yes, there are certain things I must do to prepare myself for God's government. I've learned this from the Master, not to expect God's government if I'm holding somebody in desire for revenge, if I'm holding somebody in hate. There's no way for God to break through my own consciousness. The reason is this. This comes to you at this stage of unfoldment, that God is love. But God is not a love out here that comes to me. God is a love that I let flow out from me. But since love means forgiveness, benevolence, cooperation, mutuality, sharing, giving, there is no love in me unless those qualities are being expressed. And therefore, to fit myself for God's government, which means the government of love, I must make myself an instrument through which love can flow. And that means I must not permit myself the indulgence of wanting God to destroy my enemies or my nation's enemies. Rather, I want God to, if I had the power to want anything, I would want God to forgive them. If I had the power to ask anything of God for my enemy, it would be open his eyes that he may see. Open his ears that he may hear. Fill his heart with the Christ. This attitude on my part is love. It's not personal love. I'm not doing it. I'm opening myself for it to flow through. And the question is, please tell us about forgiveness. What is it, what it is not? Is it necessarily a conscious process? What actually is done by the forgiver? Well, now, it is a conscious process. As a matter of fact, nothing takes place in your experience that isn't a conscious process. Even if some things at some time become subconscious, they nevertheless are conscious. Let me show you this. In order to forgive, I must actually have the feeling of not wanting you punished. I mean the wrongdoer. Now, what is the use of saying that I am praying for your forgiveness if I do not consciously feel that I want you to be released from your sins and from the penalties of your sins? So therefore, it must be a conscious knowing. Conscious knowing what? All right, you and I have sinned. Why quibble about it? You know it, I know it. In some degree, in some manner, omission or commission. Now, as an individual, humanly, I have been brought up, as you were, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Supposing, for example, you were called to jury duty, and it were a capital case, and the question is asked you, would you serve on a jury where there is a case for death penalty? Now, supposing your answer was, I can't because I'm a Christian. Would they let you off? No. No, they wouldn't. You would have to say, I would not bring in a verdict of capital punishment. Then they let you off. But if you say you're a Christian, that doesn't mean that you don't believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, because the Christians have adopted the ancient Hebraic teaching of an eye for an eye, and it is now Christian. It is perfectly Christian for you to want the murderer murdered. See that? Now, how are you going to change that except by a conscious act? You yourself must say, wait a minute. No longer an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, but forgive my enemy. Oh, no longer an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. At this level of consciousness, God hath no pleasure in your dying. So certainly I'm not going to send you into death then. It is not my function to be my brother's judge. Who made me a judge over you? Who told me to sit in judgment on your offenses? Oh, no. So actually, it should be enough, really, to be excused from the jury just to say, I'm a Christian. And that should mean, of course, you can't serve, because the teaching is, put up thy sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. No longer an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but forgive. But no, we have not yet adopted that into Christianity, as Christianity is practiced, and so to be excused, you would have to say, I do not believe in capital punishment, and you'd have to make it very personal. All right. Now the question is before us here. We want to be God-governed. Can we be God-governed if we're willing to sit in judgment on our brother? Can we be God-governed if we want to sit in on somebody else's death? No. No, we can't. Therefore, it has to be, forgiveness has to be a conscious act. You yourself must know why you are forgiving. You are doing it because you're not sitting in judgment on anyone. It doesn't mean that they are going to be absolved from the penalty of their sin. It doesn't mean that because you haven't got the ability or the power to absolve them. It only means you are not holding them in condemnation to it. Remember that when the Master said to the woman taken in adultery, thy sins be forgiven thee, neither do I condemn thee, he also said, go and sin no more lest the worst thing come upon thee. In other words, no one can absolve another. We can only absolve ourselves from sitting in judgment on the other. And so if I look at a thief saying, neither do I condemn thee, I forgive thee, it doesn't mean he's not going to pay the penalty for his theft. On the other hand, if he is receptive, and I have witnessed this in my prison work, where men serving terms for crimes came to this realization, and they were changed almost in the twinkling of an eye, and right after that they were pardoned or paroled, and wondered how it happened. It happened because they were no longer under the sin, therefore they were no longer under the penalty for sin. They were receptive to this love, this forgiveness. Therefore, it is a conscious act. Now, what actually is done by the forgiver, I'll tell you. The forgiver releases himself from judgment. The forgiver releases himself from hate, from condemnation, from criticism, from judgment. The forgiver releases himself from bearing false witness against his neighbor. That's what the forgiver does. And that is why the moment the forgiver does this, he is under the law of love, which is the law of God, and now healing can take place in mind and body. At the same time, if the one forgiven is at all spiritually attuned, the act of forgiving awakens a spiritual sense in them and changes their nature. I saw that work out in this way. I was appointed first reader of Christian Science Services in a prison, and usually 11, 10, 12, 13 men attended this service. And my first weeks as a reader were difficult because unconsciously I had the idea that I was talking down to them, sort of telling them to be good. I realized, of course, that this is not the way, that my part was to realize the spiritual nature of their being, even if they didn't realize it, or the judge didn't realize it, or the jury hadn't realized it. My function on that platform was to realize that call no man on earth your father. They had the same father I did. Therefore, we were of the same spiritual household, same spiritual family. Therefore, we were all spiritual beings. Well, now, what happened there was that the attendance grew so rapidly that at first we were accused of drawing them in because we had a nice soloist. Well, we removed the soloist and we got a very fat man. But our attendance kept increasing, At the end of 2 years, instead of that 11 or 12, we had 180 to 200, and we had at that time 15 men doing healing work inside the prison. That's what took place inside of 2 years by a conscious act of forgiving. Not saying, oh, you sinner, I'll let you off. That's not forgiving. Forgiving was really forgiving. Thy sins be forgiven thee. Now let's start all over. And let me recognize your true identity and no longer feel that I'm more righteous than thou, but rather that spiritually we are one. And you see, in that recognition, the men in the prison who had enough spiritual attunement were drawn to that service. We even had the experience on a Thanksgiving morning of hearing the guards go through the prison and saying, 11 o'clock Christian Science services and no free gifts. And we still had our full attendance without free gifts because we had something else. We had this act of forgiveness. We had this act of understanding. In our human identity, we are all sinners. We're all under the belief of good and evil. We're all trespassing against God's will and God's way. But we have embarked on the spiritual path, and this entails, first of all, a realization that we are not good men and women or bad men and women. We are states and stages of consciousness. And at certain stages, more evil gets through us than good. And at other stages, more good gets through than evil. But eventually, there must neither be good nor evil go through us. There must only be God. That is where we come to the Master when he can say, why callest thou me good? I'm not good. There is good flowing through me. It's God flowing through me. And that's what you feel. That's what uplifts you. That's what heals you. That's what reforms you. It isn't me. I've stepped out of the way. I am a beholder watching this spiritual presence within me do its work in your consciousness. I don't do anything. I don't use it. God isn't a tool that I can swing around and use the way I want. I am a beholder watching the Spirit of God and operate in consciousness. And as light, dispel darkness. As truth, dispel evil. As good, dispel evil, injury, so forth. So it is, then, that in this stage of our unfoldment, we are consciously aware of a presence. And it is completely invisible. It doesn't act as power. We can't feel it as power. It's more like the gentle presence that is spoken of. If it is a presence at all, it's so gentle, you can hardly know it's there except by discernment. You don't see it, you don't feel it, you don't hear it, but you know it's there. It's here, there, or someplace around us, within us. And by being a beholder, we witness it at work. We see the wondrous things it does. And that is why originally people thought that God was overcoming evil or sin or disease, when that wasn't true. God was the light. And the moment there was light, there was no darkness. In him is no darkness at all. Therefore, where him is, there is no darkness to be dispelled. And now we have arrived at that state of consciousness where there is a him. There is a he. And he is within me, closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. I do not have to instruct him to heal me or you. I do not have to implore or plead. I do not have to go through any sacrifices. I don't even have to reform. I just have to be still. Be still and know. Be not afraid. It is I. Knowest thou not? I am closer to thee than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. I will never leave thee. I will never leave thee. Think of this presence speaking to us in this way, assuring us we have nothing to do but be still. And at all times, let love flow through us. Let joy, let peace, let no condemnation, no criticism. Desire no one's evil. In other words, don't be a mental malpractitioner. Don't want anybody to come to grief. Always feel that you want them to be forgiven as you would want to be forgiven if you made a mistake. If the master could be tempted, even after he was a master, don't you see that we can still be tempted? Can you not see that there isn't one of us in this room completely above temptation? And so, supposing our particular price was met, and we fell, wouldn't our very first desire be for forgiveness? Well, so does everyone else. They want to be forgiven, not punished. We would know our wrong and still not want to be punished. We would still want forgiveness. So do they. And so that must be our attitude. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Let thy light shine within them. Thy presence be always with them. Thy grace feed and sustain them. And this is living in an attitude of not being good, just wanting to let God flow and be the good. And so you see then that at this stage, you come all the way up from the third into the fourth stage of your unfoldment. Actually, these stages shouldn't be numbered because there's no defining line where the first becomes the second or the second. It's like a transition, more like a rainbow where one color fades or goes into another color without stopping cold at any one place. So with us, you can't say I'm in the first stage or I'm in the second stage or I'm in the third stage. We're all partly in the first, partly in the second, partly in the third. We're never wholly in one or the other. We're all living witnesses of the different states and stages of consciousness. That is why the Master, even at the very end, was in a state of consciousness where he could say, let this cup pass from me, or to the disciples, why did you not stay awake with me, or why do you not pray with me? You see, that's not quite the consciousness of up here, of thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me. We volley back and forth from one stage of consciousness to another, but on the whole, we do spend most of our time in the second degree and the third degree, volleying back and forth. We're very little back in the first degree of both good and evil. Mostly we're in the second and third and edging on toward the next. To prepare oneself for the next, there must be this period of relaxing and resting in the isness of God. Not using God as a power, not using truth as a power, just being still and letting truth be itself and do itself. Being still and being a beholder. Thank you.